The void of space stretched infinitely in all directions, a silent abyss speckled with the cold fire of distant stars, and cutting through the darkness, a sleek obsidian spacecraft hurtled through the cosmos, a ghost drifting between the worlds. Inside, two figures sat in unyielding silence. Nyra's emerald eyes burned with defiance, her sharp cheekbones casting long shadows under the dim glow of the ship's control panels. Her hands curled into fists, nails biting into her palms. Across from her, Celis remained composed, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed the weight of their fate. They were outcasts now, exiled from Valora, the world they had once called home, stripped of their status, their titles, and everything they had ever known. The Zenith Tribunal had deemed them dangerous, traitors to the concordance, the unified consciousness that governed their people with an iron will. Their crime, daring to think for themselves. For centuries, their civilization had thrived on absolute unity, a synchronized harmony where individual desires dissolved into a collective mind. But Nyra and Celis had questioned the truth of it all. They had dreamed of choice, identity, freedom, concepts that their people found reckless, even treasonous. And so the verdict had been swift. You are hereby exiled from Valora. You will be cast to the outer reaches, to a primitive world unburdened by enlightenment. May you perish forgotten. Nyra's voice cut through the silence, raw with fury. I can't believe they did this to us. Her fingers tightened around the seat's armrest. Exiled? Like criminals? Just for questioning their precious unity? Celis exhaled slowly, pressing a hand against her temple. We knew the risk, sister, she said, her voice softer but no less weary. But I never thought they would go this far. Nyra's lips curled in disdain. Cowards, they call themselves enlightened, yet they fear independent thought. Her gaze darkened as she looked out at the approaching planet, an untamed, chaotic blue sphere hanging in the void. Their new prison. Celis studied the display screen as the ship's auto-navigation engaged, locking onto Terra 3, the planet known to its inhabitants as Earth. A primitive world, untouched by the hive mind, governed by fragmented nations and uncontrolled emotions. To the Valorian High Order, it was the perfect punishment. To live among beings who knew nothing of harmony, to be forced into a society of unpredictable, unenlightened creatures. The ship jolted violently as it breached Earth's atmosphere, flames licking at the hull, shaking as gravity took hold. Warnings blared across the console, the friction turning the sleek vessel into a streaking meteor across the night sky. Nyra braced herself, her heart pounding. They think they've buried us, she muttered. Celis met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Then we'll prove to them, she whispered, that we were meant to rise. And with that, the ship plummeted toward the unknown. The crash was violent. The ship carved a fiery path across the night sky, its impact shaking the earth as it embedded itself deep into an open field on the outskirts of a human city. Flames flickered around the wreckage, steam hissing from the vents as the metal groaned from the sudden deceleration. A stunned silence fell over the gathered crowd. Dozens of humans, men, women, children, stood at the edges of the crater, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. Some held their primitive devices aloft, capturing the moment with shaky hands. Then the hatch hissed as it unsealed. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as two tall figures emerged from the smoke. Nyra stepped forward first, her silver bodysuit shimmering under the glow of the flames. Her striking features, sharp cheekbones, bald head, glowing emerald eyes, were almost inhuman in their perfection. Celis followed, her stance more composed but equally otherworldly, her violet eyes scanning the gathered creatures with quiet calculation. The humans stared, their primitive minds struggling to process the reality before them. Are those aliens? Someone whispered. A voice, authoritative and calm, cut through the noise. Step back, everyone, step back. The crowd parted as a squad of armed soldiers advanced, their rifles raised but fingers hesitant on the triggers. At the center of them stood a man, tall, broad-shouldered, his graying hair cut close to his head. His uniform bore insignias of rank, and his sharp blue eyes fixed on the two extraterrestrial women with an unreadable expression. General Dominic Rains, he announced, his voice firm but controlled. United Earth Coalition, identify yourselves. Nyra crossed her arms, unimpressed. So this is Earth's welcome committee? Guns pointed at unarmed visitors. Protocol, Rains replied evenly. We've had unfriendly visitors before. Celis inclined her head slightly. I am Celis, and this is my sister, Nyra. We are exiles from Valora. We mean no harm. Rain's gaze flicked to the wreckage behind them, then back to their unreadable expressions. His instincts, sharpened by decades of diplomacy and war, told him these two were not ordinary refugees. And yet, there was something about them. We'll see about that, Rain said at last. Lower your weapons. The soldiers hesitated, but obeyed. You're coming with us, he continued. We have a lot to talk about. The journey to the facility was silent. The armored transport hummed as it sped through the darkened streets of the city, towering structures flickering past like fireflies in the night. Inside the vehicle, Nyra sat rigidly, her arms folded. Celis beside her observed everything. The soldiers, their weapons, the way some of them stole furtive glances at her and her sister. Across from them, General Rains sat, studying them in return. You don't seem too shaken, he remarked after a long pause. Nyra smirked. You don't seem too surprised. I've been doing this job a long time, Rains replied. You'd be amazed at what I've seen. Celis tilted her head. And yet, your people still react with fear. Fear is rational, Rains said simply. You crash-landed on our world in an advanced spacecraft. You look human enough, but not quite. And you expect us to just take your word that you're not a threat. Nyra leaned forward slightly, her emerald eyes glinting. Would you rather we were? Rains met her stare without flinching. That, he said, depends on what you do next. The facility was sterile, a place of sharp angles and gleaming white walls. As the sisters were led through its corridors, they observed everything. The hidden cameras, the reinforced doors, the way the soldiers kept their hands close to their weapons. They don't trust us, Nyra muttered. Celis sighed. Can you blame them? Inside a stark interrogation room, two new figures entered, both clad in military attire but younger than Rains. One was Commander Reed Walker, his muscular frame and piercing gaze exuding a quiet authority. The other, Lieutenant Asher Cole, had a more analytical presence. His brown eyes filled with curiosity rather than suspicion. So, Walker began, leaning against the table, why don't you start from the beginning? Nyra exhaled sharply. Fine, we are from Valora. We were raised in a society where individuality is, she smirked. Let's just say, not encouraged. Celis continued, her voice measured. We questioned the ways of our people. The Zenith Tribunal decided that questioning was dangerous. So they cast us out. Cole frowned. So, you're political exiles. You could call it that, Celis replied. Walker exchanged a glance with Cole, then with Rains, who had been silently watching. And now you're here, Walker said. What do you want from us? Nyra shrugged. Nothing. We didn't choose Earth. It was just where they decided to dump us. Rains leaned forward. And if your people come looking for you? Celis met his gaze, her expression unreadable. They won't. To them, we are already dead. There was something in the way she said it, something that made Rains uneasy. A long silence stretched between them before he finally sighed. We'll set up accommodations, he said at last. But understand this. You're under watch. If you so much as breathe wrong, we will act. Nyra smirked. Noted. Days passed. The sisters were given basic quarters, a small, sterile room with two narrow beds, a desk, and a single window overlooking the city beyond. Nyra hated it. They're treating us like prisoners, she muttered, pacing the room. Celis, sitting on the bed, merely observed. They don't trust us yet. Nyra snorted. Then let's give them a reason to. But the sisters were not the only ones being watched. Walker and Cole found themselves drawn to the aliens, fascinated by them in ways they couldn't explain. Walker, in particular, couldn't stop thinking about Nyra, her fire, her unwavering defiance. He admired her, even as he distrusted her. Cole, meanwhile, found himself intrigued by Celis, Her intellect, her curiosity, the way her eyes lit up when discussing Earth's technology. One evening, as Walker was patrolling near their quarters, he heard raised voices from inside. He paused, listening. "You're being reckless, Nyra," Celis snapped. "And you're being weak," Nyra shot back. "You think if we play along, they'll suddenly accept us. We are aliens to them. We always will be." Walker didn't think. He knocked once and stepped inside. Both sisters turned to him. "Need something, soldier?" Nyra drawled. Walker crossed his arms. "I was about to ask you the same thing." Celis sighed. "It's just a difference of perspective." "Is it?" Walker raised an eyebrow. "Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you're both figuring out whether or not to trust us." Nyra's lips twitched. "And what do you think?" Walker took a step forward. "I think," he said, "we're both just waiting to see who makes the first move." And in that moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them. But outside the walls of the facility, in the cold void of space, something else was moving. Something that would change everything. The night sky over Earth split open. A brilliant rift of blue light erupted high above the city, warping the very fabric of space. From its depths emerged the Valorian dreadnoughts, colossal warships, their obsidian hulls gliding through the atmosphere like silent gods descending upon a mortal world. The Zenith Tribunal had come for their wayward daughters. Inside the Earth Coalition facility, alarms blared. Red warning lights flashed across the control room as soldiers scrambled to man their stations. "Contact," a technician shouted. "Multiple unidentified ships entering Earth's orbit." General Rains stood rigid, his face grim as he stared at the screens. "Damn it," he muttered. He turned to an officer. "Get me a direct line to the United Coalition. We need every available unit mobilized now." In their quarters, Nyra and Celis had already sensed the arrival of their people. The air felt charged, as if the very atmosphere recoiled at the presence of something unnatural. Nyra's jaw tightened. They came after all. Celis exhaled, her hands curling into fists. "I told you. They wouldn't leave us be. Not as long as we exist." A sharp knock on the door. It slid open to reveal Commander Walker and Lieutenant Cole, their expressions grave. "You need to come with us," Walker said. "Let me guess," Nyra smirked. "Your people are panicking?" Walker gave a humorless chuckle. "That's one way to put it." Celis stood. "Then let's go." The control room was a storm of activity. Rain stood at the center, barking orders as holographic projections displayed the incoming fleet. When the sisters entered, all eyes turned to them. "Explain," Rains demanded. Nyra folded her arms. "You already know. They're here to erase their mistake." "They wouldn't send warships just for 2 exiles," Cole said. Celis nodded. But they would send them for what we've become." Walker frowned. "And what exactly is that?" Nyra met his gaze. "A threat." A sudden blast rocked the facility. "Direct hit," a technician shouted. "Their weapons are live." A transmission flickered across the main screen, displaying the face of an elder Valorian, his features sharp, regal, unyielding. His voice rang with an air of finality. "Nyra, Celis, you have contaminated yourselves beyond redemption. Your presence among these creatures threatens the purity of the Concordance." Celis inhaled sharply. "High Chancellor Varith." Nyra scowled. "Cut the theatrics. You're here to kill us." Varith's gaze was cold. "You were given mercy once. That mercy is now revoked." Silence. Then Rain stepped forward. "Listen to me, Varith, or whatever the hell your title is. You have just entered Earth space, unprovoked and with hostile intent. That makes this a declaration of war." Varith barely spared him a glance. "Your kind is inconsequential." Walker stepped beside Rains, arms crossed. "Funny, that's what every invader says before they lose." Varith's expression darkened. "You dare defend these inferior beings?" Nyra smirked. "Actually, we do." Celis took a breath, then stepped forward. "You don't understand, do you? You think we're a disease, that we've lost ourselves, but we haven't. For the first time, we are whole." Varith's voice turned sharp. "Then you are truly lost." The transmission cut out. An instant later, the attack began. The first wave of Valorian sentinels descended from the dreadnoughts. Their sleek black armor gleaming under the city lights, they moved with inhuman precision, advancing toward the facility with lethal intent. Earth's defense forces responded with everything they had. Tanks, aerial squadrons, missile turrets, all unleashed hell against the invading force. Walker and Cole stood alongside the sisters, blasters in hand. "Never thought my life would end fighting aliens," Walker muttered. Nyra grinned. "Don't worry, you're not dying tonight." Celis turned to Rains. "If we destroy their command vessel, the others will fall into disarray." Rains nodded. "Then we hit them where it hurts." The battle raged. The sisters fought side by side with their newfound allies, moving with a deadly grace honed from years of training. Walker covered Nyra as she charged forward, slicing through sentinels with a stolen Valorian blade. Cole kept close to Celis, providing cover fire as she worked to disable a hijacked Earth defense turret. Above them, Earth's warships engaged the dreadnoughts, the sky ablaze with fire and debris. But Valora had underestimated one thing: the strength of a people who fought for something more than obedience. As the battle reached its peak, the sisters faced their final choice. Varith, wounded but still alive, knelt before them, his once pristine robes stained with battle scars. "You have chosen the lesser path," he rasped. "But there is still time. Return to us. Rejoin the Concordance, and we will spare you." Nyra stared at him. Then, without hesitation, she raised her weapon and fired. Varith collapsed, his lifeless form a symbol of a dying empire. Celis exhaled, closing her eyes. "It's over," Walker murmured. Rain's voice came through the comms. "The fleet is retreating. We won." The realization settled. The battle was done. But their new life had only just begun. Months later, Earth had recovered. The facility was now a symbol of alliance between the two species. Nyra stood on a hill overlooking the city, arms crossed. Walker joined her, his usual smirk in place. "You staying?" he asked. She shrugged. "You'd miss me if I left." He chuckled. "Yeah, I probably would." Celis sat nearby with Cole, their hands almost touching. Cole sighed. "So what now?" Celis smiled. "Now? We build something new." And as the sun rose over the city, the lesson became clear. Lessons learned. Freedom is not given, it is taken. Nyra and Celis had to fight for their right to exist as individuals. Strength is found in unity, but not at the cost of identity. The Concordance sought to erase them, but true power lies in embracing one's uniqueness. Love, trust, and understanding can bridge even the greatest divides. What began as distrust between humans and Valorians became a bond strong enough to win a war. Sometimes exile is not the end, but the beginning. In losing everything, the sisters found their true selves, and so two exiled aliens came to Earth as punishment, but found something greater than they ever imagined: a home.